This series of talks, Searching for Religious Self-Awareness, was recorded by St. Anthony Messenger Press. The speaker is Father James Basic.
In our culture today, many people are clearly interested in self-improvement. The self-help books dominate the bookshelves in our bookstores. It's very often a matter of finding the right techniques as to how to get ahead, or how to manage one's sexual life, or how to make more money, or how to win friends. Very often it involves a methodology, a way of often manipulating and controlling one's life and other people. One of the reasons that I like to talk about a religious self-awareness is to first of all tap that interest in our culture, that notion that people want to improve themselves or are interested in greater introspection or looking within or seeing what makes them tick or how they're going to manage their affairs better. I'd like to tap that and use it and not just say, well, that's a bad or dumb thing, but I like to deepen that. That's why I like to talk about religious self-awareness. It reminds us that the quest for identity is really a most significant kind of matter, that rather than looking just on the matter of techniques and how to achieve things, we have to be concerned as well with our deepest outlooks on things, our attitudes, the perspectives within which we view things. We have to be interested in a whole philosophy of life. We have to see what theology has to tell us about how to become better people. So religious self-awareness is an attempt to build on the interest in our culture in the self-help programs and in self-improvement, but to deepen the whole question, to make sure that the significant matters get included and that we're dealing as well with our most fundamental attitudes in life. Now, when we're talking about religious self-awareness, I'm always worried that we will end up being too introspective, that it'll become just a matter of turning in on ourselves. I've taught courses in this whole matter of religious self-awareness, and over the years I've learned that if we let the questions just be personal, that students very often will have a lot of emotional problems with it. They will become too egocentric during the course. Very often they will become more nervous, or emotional problems will develop, and so on. So it seems important to help people when they're trying to achieve this deepened and heightened self-awareness to get out of themselves, to have something bigger to look at. And that's why I favor the approach of dealing with great human questions. Instead of just always asking, well, how do I feel about something, or what's going on in my own head, or what's my own emotional life like, I prefer to ask ourselves questions about reality outside of ourselves, questions that are public in their nature, that other people have dealt with as well. And that's why I think it's important always to be able to look at other human beings to see how they have handled these great questions. So I found that it was helpful in these courses on religious self-awareness to ask every student to study a particular individual, to read an autobiography of one person, or to read a biography of them, read their writings, and try to use this technique of passing over to the other person, to try to see the world from their viewpoint, to for a while adopt their categories. This is all an effort to get out of the imprisonment of self and try to see a larger world, to try to learn by looking at other people. First of all, by looking at the great questions, like what do I really hope for in life, or what do I really believe, or how do I experience the mystery in my life, how do I handle time. Questions like that are part of the public debate in our world and have been throughout our Western civilization. And so that we don't just get turned in on ourselves excessively, so that we can look outside of ourselves. Part of it is the ideal of conversation. When conversation goes on, we're not just sharing a subjective viewpoints and interests, but very often good conversations involve having something objective out here to look at, something to talk about that's worthwhile. Very often those are our more satisfying conversations. So I have this same idea in the way I'm structuring this business of religious self-awareness, to have great questions that we can grapple with, wrestle with them in one way or another, and to have real live individuals who guide us in this whole process. I guess I move in that direction because my sense is that the privatistic and individualistic tendencies in our culture seem to be growing rather than lessening. We seem to be more and more retreating into ourselves and into our own private world, worrying only about ourselves instead of reaching out and being part of the larger community and having the common good in our own interest, having that be the thing that motivates us in life, the common good or common interest, the public debate. Now, the question I want to deal with now is that of how do I achieve self-fulfillment? How do I become a more fulfilled individual? Now that question, especially in our own time, has become so narrow. A certain narcissism has taken it over, a turning inward, so that people begin to think that self-fulfillment involves simply going out and looking out for one's own interests. So we find individuals in the culture just giving up their responsibilities in order to go seek their own future and try to make a better life for themselves. Just people simply tossing over promises made and responsibilities to communities and saying, well, no, I have to look out for number one now. I think that while there is a certain truth in that, and while some people find themselves necessarily unable to keep promises or vows or commitments, surely that happens and we can't make an absolute out of those. However, I think the clear tendency is to move in what we might call a solipsistic direction, a direction in which we are simply concerned about our own selves and not concerned enough about the larger world. So when we begin to talk about self-fulfillment, we are immediately, I think, off base in the culture. Immediately people's mind jumps to the pop psychology of our own time and this whole effort to do it in a private and individualistic way. Therefore, I feel if we're going to attack this question constructively, we need a shock. We need something that will come in there and just blow it all away for us. Force us to try to look at it in a totally different way. Shake up our categories. Just challenge our ordinary way of thinking. And I want to do that now by trying to introduce the thought of Mohandas Gandhi. Now we're moving into the Eastern tradition, a man steeped in Hinduism. And a man who lived very differently. He represented more of the Eastern kind of outlook. Now, when I begin to talk about Gandhi, I probably ought to locate him a bit in history and just tell a bit of his story. He was born into a Hindu family in India in 1869, and according to the customs of the time, he was married to a young girl, Kasturbai by name, when he was only 13 years old. And later on, after he was married to her, 3 years later, his father died. And that was really a traumatic event for him. His father was sick, and he used to nurse him and take care of him. But on this given night, he was with his wife, having intercourse with his wife, when his father died. And Gandhi always blamed himself for that. He felt that he was terribly guilty, even though he was making love to his own wife. He felt somehow that he had been lustful, that lust had taken him away from his family responsibilities. And in a sense, his whole life was trying to somehow make up for this terrible sin that he thought he had committed back when he was only 16 years old and he was not at his father's deathbed. And then at the age of 18, he went to England to study, and he completed his law degree in about 4 years. And then he went back to India and tried to set up a law practice, but that really didn't go so well. So he went to South Africa in 1893 as a legal advisor. And shortly after he got there, he was getting on a train, and he had a ticket to be on a certain place in this train. But the conductor of the train ordered him off and treated him very rudely and roughly because of his color. And it was at that time, it seems, that Gandhi got a much greater sense of discrimination in the world. He began to feel firsthand what people who were downtrodden went through. Here he was a man of education and accomplishment, and he could just simply be thrown off a train. And it seemed at that time he really dedicated himself to a life of attempt to resist this discrimination, to create a more harmonious world. He worked for the cause of the Indians in South Africa until 1914, trying to protest the injustice that they underwent. He led strikes during that time. At times he was put into jail, all because he was trying to work for greater social justice. And then it was that he went back to India and tried there to see what he could do on behalf of people who were downtrodden, in a famous campaign on behalf of a group of mill workers who were trying to strike for their rights. He led the strike and indeed succeeded in getting them a better working condition. And then he became interested in the larger political questions, and late in 1921 he began to lead a mass civil disobedience campaign in an effort to secure Indian independence from England. And he used a lot of different methods to accomplish this. He included long fasts, marches where he'd gather large numbers of people, symbolic kinds of action like burning the cloth that the British had made, or marching to the sea and taking a little bit of salt. They weren't allowed to produce their own salt, and so he broke the law in that way. So he was into this whole civil disobedience idea, all trying to win the independence of India from Great Britain. And finally, in 1947, his long campaign reached at least partial fruition when British India was divided into the two self-governing dominions of India and Pakistan. So that finally he achieved what he had been really working for. And then in 1948, at the age of 79, he was assassinated, which seems to happen so often to people who work for social justice and who take upon themselves the cause of the poor. Now Gandhi, therefore that's just a little bit to keep in mind who we're talking about when we say Mohandas Gandhi, who was also known as the Mahatma, or the Great Souled One, became really an international figure in his life. Now, Gandhi partook of the whole Eastern attitude on this kind of question that we're dealing with, so that for him, the problem was not to build up the ego so that we could deal with a harsh reality and create our own world and be assertive and all of those kinds of things. His idea was that ego was the problem. The ego that sort of, in an illusory manner, tries to dominate reality. This involves sort of a distorted kind of consciousness in which we're not in touch with reality as we really should be. So for him, the real problem was one of self-realization. Not so much self-fulfillment, to do our own thing, but self-realization, where we would come to the truth about life, where we would get rid of our selfishness, where our ego would be gotten out of the way, where we would shatter the illusions of the society and world in which we lived. So for the Eastern world, and for Gandhi, it is more a matter of getting rid of the ego, of debasing oneself, of renouncing. That's the way we really become the kind of human beings we ought to be. Now that kind of talk sounds strange, and that is why I'm using it, because I think we need to shatter our preconceptions about what self-fulfillment is all about. We need to see a whole other way of looking at it. That's why I want to pass over to Mohandas Gandhi, to try to look at the world in his way now, to try to look at what human growth and development is all about from his perspective. And I think very often that is a big help to us then in correcting our own viewpoint. But that takes effort, because one could immediately say a lot of the things he did or said don't really make much sense, and they're not the way certainly that we would live. But that was what he was all about. He saw his whole life as a struggle for self-realization. In his great autobiography, which is called The Story of My Experiments with Truth, which is just a remarkable book, and very helpful in this whole study, he said, what I want to achieve, what I've been striving and pining to achieve these 30 years, is self-realization, to see God face to face. I live and move and have my being in pursuit of this goal. He even thought of this as the real religious search in life. So if he was looking for religious self-awareness, if he was using my terms, he would identify his search for truth and getting rid of ego with religion. He says the term religion, I am using it in its broadest sense, meaning thereby self-realization or knowledge of self. Now, Gandhi was a committed Hindu. He did know Christian people. He was at times very turned off by the Christians that he knew. But he did read the Christian scriptures, and he was very taken by the Sermon on the Mount. He saw that as being one of the highest expressions that humans have ever attained of what life is all about. And especially, he liked that business about resist not evil. But if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other cheek. If someone takes your coat, let him have your cloak too. He says that those phrases delighted him beyond measure. And they reminded him of some of the important truths of his own religion. So he knew the Christian outlook and liked that part of it, but there were other parts of Christianity that he really couldn't see. It's interesting, he once compared the Buddha with Jesus and ended up saying that the Buddha was superior to Jesus because the Buddha had a better outlook on nature and more love of animals than Jesus had. And therefore, the Buddha had demonstrated a superiority to Jesus. But Gandhi had the highest respect for Jesus as well. But for Gandhi, his real inspiration was found in his Hindu scriptures, especially the great writing known as the Bhagavad Gita, commonly known just as the Gita. And Gandhi interpreted the Gita much as modern scripture scholars interpret the Bible in the Western world. That is, he saw it not just in a literal way, but as containing deeper truths and telling us new and better ways to live our lives. The story of the Gita really is about this fellow Arjuna. And Arjuna is faced with the problem of whether he should fight a battle or not. He's the leader. And the people he's supposed to fight are his own relatives. And so he thinks to himself, well, if I fight my own relatives and defeat them, I'm going to feel very bad because I've killed them. And if I lose and if I don't fight and let them take me over, then I will be defeated as well. So he couldn't see any kind of answer to his problem. But Arjuna found out that Krishna, an avatar, that is an incarnation of the god, was his charioteer sitting next to him. So he engages Krishna in conversation, and Krishna, during the course of their conversation, solves his problem for him. And Krishna tells him that the answer to your dilemma is this: yes, you must fight, but you must fight while renouncing the fruits of action. You fight and do the best you can, but you don't get hung up on the success or failure of it. You don't worry about whether you're going to win or lose or not. You just do it. And Gandhi felt that that was one of the great insights in all of history. One of the most important things that has ever been said. That is that the matchless remedy for the problem of life really is the renunciation of the fruits of action. That's the center of what the whole Gita is about. And he goes on to explain a little bit about how this can help us and to become better people. It's supposed to tell us about a certain kind of detachment in life, where we're able to stand apart from the ordinary things that worry people. It's the opposite of getting hung up on success or failure. We're not supposed to worry about those things so much. You can immediately see what a great corrective this would be in our Western world, where we're so hung up on competition and success, where people always have to be number one, where we find sports very often moving people to be overly competitive, losing the real ideal of competing against one's own potential and saying the real competition is against those others and I must defeat them. We find this going on in families where children compete for the affection of their parents, where they think that they have to win that somehow. Teachers find it in schools, where the children are often so competitive and can't stand to be measured up against only their own potential. And so we know that in our own culture how people are always measured according to climbing the socioeconomic ladder, that people don't feel good about themselves if they don't make enough money, and that people who attain a certain stature in life and a certain position like to throw their weight around, and everyone looks up to the people who have made it, and so on. So there's no doubt that we live in a success-oriented culture. The cultural commentators have made that very clear, and just looking around in our own experience in lives tells us that. And what Gandhi is saying in his commentary on the Gita is something very different. He's saying that we shouldn't think about success. We shouldn't even wonder about it. We should renounce it completely and totally and simply concentrate on the effort, on the action in life. Now, many people, when they hear this, would immediately be upset, and they'd say, well, if you adopt that attitude, if you don't care if you succeed or not, then you won't do anything. You'll get paralyzed. Why try? You won't. You'll just sit around and do nothing. You'll never make anything out of yourself. You won't accomplish anything. And Gandhi felt just the opposite. He says the Gita is telling us, do your allotted work, but renounce its fruits. Be detached and work. Have no desire for reward and work. He said, but renunciation of fruit in no way means indifference. Oh, it is the ideal he has is the person who will plan properly, who will do what he's supposed to do, but it will avoid the usual problems. He talks about people who are hung up on success. He says people who are ever brooding over result often lose their nerve in the performance of their duty. They become impatient and give vent to anger and begin to do unworthy things. People who are like that jump from action to action, never remaining faithful to any. He who broods over results is like a man given to objects of senses. He is ever distracted. He says goodbye to all scruples. Everything is right in his estimation, and he therefore resorts to means, fair and foul, to attain his end. And so Gandhi is putting before us a whole other ideal of this renunciation of the fruits of action. Now that really is an interesting thing to reflect upon, I think. What would that mean to us? How would that work for us? I myself think of it as mainly a corrective. I don't think that we can pass over to Gandhi's viewpoint and read the Gita and get everything out of it that he does. And I don't think we could really live with that attitude totally, where I just don't care about how things turn out. But I do think it could be a great corrective where we could reduce our real worry about whether we are going to be successes or failures, where we could live more easily with our down times and with the times when we're not number one, when we would reduce that idea of thinking we always have to be on top in life. It would seem to me that that could correct a lot of this. And as we think about that, whether it is true that this would reduce us then to passivity and quietism, where we would do nothing, I think if we look at Gandhi's life, it's just the opposite. Is it not interesting that here's a man who renounced the fruits of action, and yet was one of the most politically successful people who ever lived? Through his techniques and attitude, he liberated a whole country from British domination. He was successful politically. The strange thing is that this was pragmatically beneficial. It worked for him. He was a whirlwind. He was always in action. He was always leading marches and helping other individuals and trying to see that strikes were successful and working at civil disobedience and writing things and publishing newspapers and founding these communities which he called ashrams, where people lived together. Always giving guidance to people, meeting the great people of the world who came to him for advice. He was tremendously involved in life. He was tremendously successful. And yet he tells us the reason he was so successful was because he was able to give up things, because he renounced the fruits of action. Now, he didn't accomplish that just simply by one day saying, well, that's how I'm going to live. He worked at it. He found out that in his life he had to renounce many things in order to be able to renounce this really large thing. So that one of the things that he did was to fast. Very often he controlled his diet terrifically. He was always concerned about what he ate and what others ate. Only he was a vegetarian. His son was dying one time. And they felt that he needed some meat as part of his diet and at least some broth. And Gandhi would not let them give his son the broth, even though he might die. As a matter of fact, he didn't die, but he took this idea of diet and what food we ate so seriously. And so Gandhi, he felt that there was certain foods that certain people should avoid. For example, he thought that celibates should stay away from drinking too much milk. He felt that that was bad because milk somehow stirred up the passions. He felt that there were certain fruits that one should eat if one had a particular disease. So Gandhi was big on this idea of controlling the diet, and also he used fasting in order to make a social comment. One time he was involved in this business of fighting for social justice, and it was this mill workers' strike. And he writes this in his autobiography. He says, "One morning, it was at mill hands meeting, the light came to me, unbidden and all by themselves, the words came to my lips. Unless the strikers rally, I declared to the meeting, and continue the strike till a settlement is reached, or till they leave the mills altogether, I will not touch any food." And so it just came to him in a flash to use this fasting for a social cause. So he used it not only to curb his own passions and to keep himself healthy and energized for life, but he used it in the cause of social justice. It's something, of course, that is picked up. Many people today find themselves using those kinds of things. A priest friend of mine was telling me not long ago that he started fasting 1 day a week, and he thought it would make him sick and tired and so on, and that he'd have a headache. But he told me, strangely, that didn't happen. He felt much clearer-headed on those days and found out he had more energy. It's an example, I think, of this renouncing something, giving up something, and thereby finding a greater strength as a result. This renunciation included sex as well for Gandhi. I think it was when he was in his late 30s. One day he simply announced to his wife that they were now going to live as celibates. He simply decided that unilaterally. Now, I don't think that people today would think much of Gandhi for his approach to this matter, and I don't think that the feminists would be especially happy with this approach. And it's true that Gandhi was very harsh on his wife and did not show her the kind of kindness that he often exhibited to other people. I was just thinking one time he told his wife that she was to look after the untouchables, the lowest class in their society, and clean up after them. And he told her that she better do that and do it with a smile, or else she was going to be out. So the picture of Gandhi is not a totally rosy one, and many of the things he did I don't think we want to emulate. But what I want to get at is this notion of how he used renunciation. And so he thought that really if he renounced sex, even within his marriage, that he would be a better public servant, that somehow his mind would be clearer for doing the business of fighting for social justice. I'm sure that most people would disagree with that, and that in the Western world that would fly in the face of our own understanding of human sexuality and the healthy outlook that we think we should have on it, and the way it is mutually fulfilling for the people involved and often energizing. So it would fly in the face of all of that. But Gandhi, again, was ready to give that up in order that he could somehow perform his duties better. He even felt that that he at times had to renounce friendship in order to accomplish his goals. That even getting too close to people at times. This happened in one occasion when there was a British friend of his who sort of spurned him and turned his back on him after Gandhi had given him his friendship. And after that time, I think he was very leery of getting too involved in this kind of relationship. So there was, for him, this real need for a certain kind of total discipline in life, that renunciation really becomes a part of what makes us tick, and that this is the way we're going to somehow achieve this self-realization. All the time what he's trying to do is get rid of the ego, get rid of the selfishness, get rid of this idea that I must build myself up. His idea was, no, you get the ego reduced. You cut down on your needs. You try to get rid of all of that. And of course, the great way that he did this was in terms of his renunciation of violence. So he was the one who really thought that all violence had to be gotten rid of. It's interesting to note that his response to Hitler and Hitler's invasions of other countries, and the way he thought it should be handled was in a totally nonviolent way. His solution was not to fight Hitler directly with bombs and weapons, but to allow Hitler to take over the world and to resist him nonviolently, to use civil disobedience. Now that's a way which strikes again us as so strange, and people will say, well, that could never work, and so on. But as a matter of fact, Gandhi really was strong on this nonviolence. He's, of course, the one who influenced Martin Luther King's own approach to civil disobedience and nonviolence in our own country, and has influenced much of the approach around the world. There's certain things to be said for this nonviolent approach, because very often when people have tried to overthrow a given social system and they get to power, they end up being as ruthless as the others. Whereas in Gandhi's mind, if you avoided that to begin with and didn't use the means that others employed, then the violent means, then you would be in a position to govern more humanely and create a really just society. So he called this whole campaign Satyagraha, which translated means something like truth force, or Martin Luther King liked to translate that as soul force or soul power. It means the power of truth in life, that if you get to the truth of the matter, if you get in touch with God, who is truth, and if you get rid of your own selfish ego, then you're going to be in a position to exert real power in the world. Truth has a power of its own. It was said that when people came to see Gandhi, talk to him, they could not lie in his presence. That they couldn't do it. It was physically impossible because the man radiated truth somehow. It's a common report of people who talked to him, that they were called out of themselves, they were moved to speak truthfully. And certainly that was the ideal that he lived in his own life. So the point of this is to say that he was a man of renunciation. He thought you became fully human by giving things up, by giving up food, by giving up sex, by even renouncing friendship, by a sort of total discipline in one's life, by renouncing violence, and even renouncing the fruits of action. So here we have a powerful system there. A man who was successful in life, both personally, becoming a good man, although he had his dark side and his shadow point, especially with his family. He didn't seem to do very well with them. Certainly, though, he did well in loving others, the untouchables in his own society, raised up their level, and certainly was politically successful in freeing his country. Now, what again does that tell us? Now, what are we to learn from that, living in a culture where self-fulfillment is the high ideal? Well, I believe that he puts before us this great importance of discipline. It's somehow, I talk to young people who think they want to achieve things in life, but without really trying. They're going to just sail through. They don't want to give the impression of sweating too much over it. They don't sweat it, they say. You don't want to really be showing too much emotion or getting too involved in it. One is just going to slide into a successful world. I find that in dealing with people who come in to get married. They very often think that, well, somehow this will all work out no matter whether they try or not. The marriage will just be successful. We're made for each other. This marriage is made in heaven, and we're just going to go along with this. The fulfillment's going to come without any kind of discipline or giving up. And so we find that in many sectors. We find in the moral life, people will say this, well, I'm going to get better. I'm going to do, by Easter, I'm going to be a better person, but I'm not really going to take Lent too seriously. Or later on in my life, I'm going to be terrific. I'm going to meet the challenges and become a really good and successful Christian. And yet there's no thought of the asceticism, the mortification, the discipline, the hard work, the systematic effort that has to go in there. And I think Gandhi challenges all of that. To pass over to the world of Gandhi would say, well, where is the asceticism in my own life? Where do I need to introduce certain disciplines? Where am I in danger of being out of control somehow? How is it that I must try harder in my life? Do I have to fast more? Do I have to make sure I get up at the right hour? Do I have to purposely build in certain meditation times or spiritual reading times? What kind of penances need I do? I think in the church today we often talk about positive penances and doing good things like loving acts and going to Mass and reading the Bible as opposed to giving things up. But Gandhi would say, hey, wait a second, let's not give up those renunciation practices so easily. Perhaps we need to do a little of that. Maybe that ought to be part of the penance as well. Not for sadistic reason, not because we are masochists, but because we need those to somehow achieve self-realization, to become a better person, and to move towards our full development. So I think he would challenge us in that way, to say, do I need a little bit more of that in my life? I think that he would remind us perhaps of ways in which we might be violent. Not where we're going around and maybe hitting people or starting fights or that kind of thing, but are there ways in which we do not respect the freedom of other people, in which we inflict a certain violence on other human beings, maybe because we're clever and know how to manipulate people, maybe because we can sweet-talk people into things, maybe because we know how to pout or feel sorry for ourselves and thereby get other people to do what we want them to do. Anyways, this becomes a way of using a subtle type of violence on other people. Perhaps that's a little misuse of the word, but it certainly is not a clear respecting of the freedom of other people, and it's got this sort of violent side to it in which we're psychically attacking the other person very often, although they don't really know it or understand what's going on. So here we find perhaps some correctives, some ways we could use Gandhi's thought. I remember a time when I tried to use Gandhi's thought on my golf game. I remember that I couldn't putt at all, and I was getting worse and worse, too many three-putt greens. And so one of the techniques I adopted was to learn from Gandhi. And Gandhi renounced the fruits of action. And what that meant to me was, when you get over the putt, don't worry about if it's going in or not. Don't think if it's going into the hole or not. Just try and swing properly. Just try and do the effort as you should do. Concentrate on the performance of the act and not worry if it's going in the hole or not. Now, theoretically, that is a really good solution to the problem, and it ought to have helped my putting. But I'm afraid I have to report it really didn't work like I would have wanted it to. But I do think the principle could be of use in our life as a whole, apart from our golf game. And that is that it could correct an overly success orientation. And when we get away from just worrying about success, then we can perform. Then we can put the concentration in on the effort. And I think really when we do that, we do function better. I can think, like, if I'm giving a talk and I'm worried about my self-image or I'm worried about how I come across, I perhaps can't really give that talk like I ought to. I'm too worried about how I'm coming across rather than just concentrating on what I'm doing. And I think teachers could find that in the classroom. Many different endeavors. Parents, maybe, could get too hung up on the success of their children. They could become pushy with their kids, trying to force them into activities they don't want to do, and trying to make them perform above their capabilities. Maybe if parents could renounce the fruits of action a little bit, they would be better with their children. They could relate to them in a quieter kind of way, more self-confident way. They would respect the individuality of their children more. And I think the strange and paradoxical thing is that it might well work a lot better. Now, I don't think that we're going to buy Gandhi wholesale. He turns too many people off. And it's even hard to listen to the harsh side of his teaching. But it suggests to me a different kind of ideal here with this self-fulfillment thing. And that is that self-fulfillment has to involve two kinds of things: self-actualization and self-surrender. I've got to combine those two things in my life. I have to know, I have to be a person who wants to become better. I want to grow in the love of the Lord. I want to come closer to Almighty God. I want to better reflect the Spirit within me. I want to be able to communicate with other human beings better. I have to make a systematic effort to do that. I have to climb that mountain towards greater maturity. I have to look at my faults and try to systematically overcome them. I have to work at trying to become this better person. That's all self-actualization. There's a lot of initiative involved, a lot of intelligent effort, work at trying to improve myself. But I need a whole other side to the business, a self-surrender. I have to know when to let go. I have to know when to hand myself over to the Lord. I have to be the kind of person that realizes I'm totally dependent upon Almighty God, that I'm a contingent human being. I don't necessarily have my existence in my hands. I have to learn to surrender. In fact, in my death, I will have to surrender. I won't be able to hang on anymore. And in one sense, my whole life is learning to do that in my death, to surrender graciously, to hand myself over to my God. There's a lot of talk in the air today about learning to let go. I know I was talking to a lady who's involved in Al-Anon, and it seems these people who are involved in Alcoholics Anonymous or Al-Anon or Alateen seem to really learn important things about life. And they often summarize it under that phrase, letting go. They learn that you have to let go of things in life. The wife of the alcoholic learns that she can't solve his problem. She can't make him be like she wants him to be. The harder she tries to pin him down and force him and to get him to shape up, the worse he seems to get. And these people learn to let go. They surrender. They hand it over to God, hand it over to the higher power. So I believe that a lot of that talk in our world today is really healthy. This self-surrendering idea. It is a question of meeting certain limitations in life and just saying, I can't do anything about it. When we're in the business of trying to help others as counselors or teachers or parents, sometimes we have to just say, I've done my best, now it's up to them. I have to let them go. I just can't do any more. We have to, in preparing our work and doing our job, sometimes we just reach limitations. We don't have any more time or energy. And we just have to say, that's the best I can do. I have a talk to prepare. I have so many hours to prepare it. I put that in. I have to go out and give the talk. It won't be perfect. It won't be all that I could have done if I'd had more time. But I have to be able to say, there it is, and I have to live with it. I have to surrender, let go of that perfectionism, and be able to say, okay, I'm at ease with that. I did the best I could. I renounce the fruits of action, I concentrate on the effort, and I put before God, I did my best. Seems to me if we can go to bed at night like that and be able to say, Lord, some things went well, some things bombed out, I was successful here, failure here, but Lord, I put in a good effort. I tried as best as I could. The effort was there, and I put all of that effort in your hands. That seems to me to be the self-surrendering idea. So what we need, it seems to me, is to let Mohandas Gandhi work as a corrective on our success-oriented culture, on our notion of self-fulfillment. So when I say self-fulfillment, if all I've got in my mind is that I'm going to build up my ego to face life, that I'm going to improve my own self, develop my own talents, and just work on that part of it, I'm probably going to be off the track. I'm in danger of missing my responsibilities to other people. I'm in danger of becoming too egocentric, too turned in on myself. And Gandhi challenges that. And if we let the challenge in to renounce the fruits of action, then I think we're in a better position to grow and develop in a properly human way. Then the message of the gospel can become real to us. Then we're able to look at Jesus Christ as he was, a person who was active in his life, but knew that he had to surrender himself to the Father, to do the will of the Father. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. So Jesus has always become the model and the example of the real way to develop as a human being. It includes self-actualization, where we try to make the most out of ourselves and do the best job of spreading the kingdom and humanizing our world. and at the same time we're able to surrender ourselves, give ourselves over to God. And I think in this way we move towards a healthy balance in life, and then self-fulfillment can be a positive word for us, in which we really grow and develop precisely because we realize our total and complete dependence on Almighty God.
All rights to this talk are reserved by St. Anthony Messenger Press, 1615 Republic Street, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45210. This series of talks, Searching for Religious Self-Awareness, was recorded by St. Anthony Messenger Press. The speaker is Father James Basic.
In religious self-awareness, we're trying to bring to our conscious, reflective life some of the things that often remain submerged in our pre-conscious or unconscious life. We live busy lives, and it's easy to just get caught up in all of the routine and demands upon our time and never get around to thinking about the things that are very obvious and real to us, the things that really pertain to our religious life. Now, I want to talk now about the whole question of time. How do I handle time? Now, at first, people would not think of such a question as having any kind of religious dimension to it. We could think of time almost totally in terms of technique. How do I manage my time better? How do I try to save time or keep from wasting time? But I would like to approach the question of time from a deeper level. First of all, I want to try to establish a philosophy of time, or to examine our general outlooks on time, to see how perhaps poor attitudes get us in trouble in our general use of time. I would like to figure out how we can indeed make better use of the time that is given to us. How can we handle it better? Now, people really do have a lot of difficulties with time. I know in talking to individuals, a lot of these problems come out. And one way of thinking about it is that very often people end up living half-heartedly. To live half-heartedly means that we're not able to enjoy the present moment, that we're somehow living in a self-conscious way, worrying about our image or what people are thinking about us, that we find ourselves playing a role, that we feel like we are being watched by someone or some group of other people, and we have to play this role or keep our masks on, that we end up somehow not being present to people, that we're absent from life, we're really not immersed in it. This is something of what I mean by saying that people often live in a half-hearted fashion. You might take a simple kind of example of a conversation. So you're at a party, and a person comes up and says, well, it's how you say, how you doing? And a person says, well, it's terrible. I got this terrible backache. It's really giving me problems. I don't know what I'm going to do about it. And you stand there and say, well, yes, that's very good. Nice. Very good to talk to you. See you around. This is an example of how we are not immersed in what is going on. We're half-hearted in that encounter. We're really not present to this other individual. Biologically present, yes, but in the sense of any engagement, of any involvement, of any attention to this other person's needs or what they're trying to say, none of that at all. This is something of what I mean by saying that we often live half-heartedly, not enjoying the present moment. Now, there's a lot of reasons why this might happen, and there's a lot of ways in which it gets played out. And we might think, first of all, of the problems we have with living fully in the present. We might at times feel that we are harried individuals. We don't have enough time. We're too busy. There's too many demands on our time. We can't make any clear priorities in life. Find ourselves wasting time. We feel pressured. People are making demands on us. They're trying to figure out how we're going to handle it all. We get involved in what we might call frenzied activity. So we got so much to do, we don't think it through, and we're just rushing from one thing to the other and really not doing any one part of it well at all. We might feel conflicts in the way we use our time, and conflicts between the time we spend with the family and time spent at work. We might find difficulties in working in our own personal time for our own growth, and so we're always sort of fighting for more time for the various areas of our life. Oh, this happens to people. I talk to individuals come and say, geez, I'm working all the time. I go to work at 7 o'clock in the morning, come home at 7 at night. I'm even bringing work home with me. There's just not enough time to talk to my wife. The kids are growing up, and it seems like I don't spend enough time with them. I just don't have the time. I got to put the bread on the table. I have to earn a living. I got to produce at work, and these are the demands that are made upon me. This is the harried individual. This is the housewife who feels herself pulled by her children. She's trying to keep the house decent, trying to get a meal on the table for when her husband comes home. The kids come home from school. They want to tell her about what's going on to school. Got to take the kid to the Boy Scout meeting, run him off to the soccer field. Over and over, the same kind of demands. And the poor woman is sensing, my heavens, I'm going to go crazy with this. I can't put up with this anymore. I'm being pulled in too many directions. An example of the harried individual. Not enough time. That's the sense. I can't live in the present because there simply isn't enough time. Now there's an opposite kind of problem that some people have, and that is they feel bored. There's too much time. People have time on their hands. They feel they have to kill time. It's a problem of being able to use leisure time well. In our culture, it's an interesting thing that many people will say that they are depressed on Sundays, Sunday afternoons and evenings especially. Why is this? Very often it is because the regular busyness of life doesn't engage them. They're thrown back upon themselves. They don't know what to do about all of this. People in the culture are getting it, sometimes anyway, a little bit more opportunity for leisure, but often enjoying it less. Even the leisure time becomes busy time. Got to get so many things in, run here or there, see these different people, visit these relatives, get out to have the picnic, rush back to do something else. Even the leisure time seems to take on a different kind of character. We have the phenomenon known as the workaholic. The workaholic is one who cannot use the leisure time, who is caught up only in the work, who defines themselves only by the job, find themselves not being able to relax. It's almost like the adrenaline is flowing for the job, and one is sort of on a high level, running on extra juice all the time. And then when it comes time to have the leisure or to do something else or have Sunday off, the person finds the adrenaline is still flowing, and maybe they get a headache because they don't know what to do with it, or they feel if they're antsy if they just sit down, or if they try to sit and read a book, they just would get very nervous. So here we find a different kind of problem of the workaholic. I think one of the sad experiences in my life is to visit the nursing homes very often. I have a picture in my mind of this woman sitting in this chair, staring out the window. I come and talk to her, and then I say, Karen, how are you doing? And so on. I find out from Karen that she's been sitting there for 20 years, staring out that window. And she tells me that, Father, what I really just want to do is die, and I can't. She's given up on life. She has nothing really to do. She's got time on her hands. She's got too much time. And the boredom sets in, and the terrible inner anxieties that take this woman over. And so it is true, even though most people feel harried and busy, there is an opposite kind of problem that we have to face. That is the problem of being bored, of having too much time, of not being able to use constructively and in a recreating way the leisure time that we do have. Still another kind of problem with the present moment, of living in the present and being half-hearted about the present, is this business of living as a now generation person. What this means is that a person is so immersed in the present moment that they have no sense of the past or of the future. There's no sense that really that one stands on the shoulders of other people, and that there are consequences in the future of what one is doing now. So while it appears that this person is really gung-ho and involved in life, really it is a half-hearted involvement because it is short-sighted, because it's not looking at the long history that brought this moment, and it's got no thought for the morrow of what's going on in the future. Now, I think of an example of that. That's the person who's really working hard at the job, but has no time for the kids. Really immersed. You're watching them. Boy, they work hard. Boy, they even enjoy their work. But they don't spend any time with their children. They don't think that, boy, one day they're going to be grown up and gone. And that day comes and they say, my heavens, I never interacted with my children. We never went to a ball game. Never went on a picnic. I never took them to see the cathedral in the city. Never went to the art museum. We didn't do things together. I never talked to them. I don't even know what they did in school, really. Here is a person who is living apparently in the now, part of the now generation in a sense, but is doing it in a very short-sighted way, and therefore it is far less healthy than might at first appear. There is a half-heartedness about it because an important aspect of the present moment, in this case the children and their development and growth, is simply ruled out. So these are some of the problems I would see with living in the present in a half-hearted way. I guess what we'd have to do is sort of check ourselves out on that and see where do I fit? Am I the harried person, or do I find myself bored, or am I sort of negligent to the full range of things that are demanding my attention in the present moment? Now, some of our other problems with time occur with the past. It is possible to be a cynical person in relationship to the past. This is where one would feel angry over bad breaks in the past. That, boy, if things had been different, I would really be better off. If I hadn't had to go to work so early, and if I could have finished school and gone to college, I would really be a successful person now. And it really makes me mad that I couldn't do that. And one begins to blame all the bad things now on the fact that one really could never have that opportunity to go to school and develop oneself. It's possible to be preoccupied with guilt. And so we find in our culture, strangely enough, as liberated and as lightened as we sometimes think we are, that guilt is still a major problem. People are feeling guilty about the past. People are preoccupied with sins of the youth. I still talk to people like that who are bothered with the problem of scrupulosity, people who can't believe that they were ever forgiven. They might be able to say, well, other people forgive me, but maybe even God forgives me, but I can't forgive myself. I can't allow myself to begin again. And so this would imprison a person in the past and would and not allow them to live wholeheartedly in the present moment. Perhaps it is a matter of failing to see the good in the past. One looks back and says, boy, that was a crummy life. Everything went wrong. My parents didn't treat me right, had a crummy time in high school. Nothing really worked for me. And so that as one begins to look at the past, only the bad things come up. We can even do that on a day-to-day basis when we go to bed at night and examine our conscience. We can think, boy, as we go through the day, nothing but the bad things. Boy, I blew it here. I was insensitive there. I didn't get this work done. Lazy here. Only the bad moments come to mind. Maybe all the good things that happen simply are put out of consciousness. And so the past somehow here ends up being nothing but evil, nothing but a downer. And it's the problem for us, therefore, is very often we're unable to come to terms with our past, unable to integrate it in a healthy way into the present moment in one way or another. I think of some people in the Catholic community who perhaps were very careful in following the leadership in the church on the teaching of birth control and who have a large family as a result. And maybe now they feel differently about birth control or they've changed their opinion. And what happens? They end up sitting there being angry over that past. They're mad because of the things they were taught, and they can't integrate that at all. Perhaps other people find themselves angry because they never studied in the past. They didn't learn a foreign language, or they didn't learn their math, and now they're sitting here not able to function well at all, and they're just angry about the training that went on. I think I find priests that way sometimes in thinking about the seminary days. The seminary perhaps was not a pleasant experience, or they didn't learn the kind of things that they think they should have. And they walk around being angry or upset about that, and very often to such a degree that they can't get on with the process of trying to learn what is available now and update themselves theologically. So I think that probably all of us could find ways in which maybe we haven't assimilated the past and are excessively negative about it or angry about what went before. But also with the past, it would be possible to be sort of naively nostalgic about it, to take very opposite opinion, that everything in the past was good and beautiful. Everything that went on was for the good. There would be little sense of the ambiguity of the past, of the checkered history. For example, some people will do that with the church as a whole. They have the opinion that the church was always perfect in the past. Everything went smoothly. There was no conflicts. Everyone thought the same. And therefore, because they have that opinion of the church, when they see conflicts going on in the present moment, they're really not able to deal with that. They end up thinking to themselves, "Geez, this is a crummy age, terrible time. Things used to be better. They were nicer before." Perhaps this happens as well in, for example, in parish life, where people will say, boy, the parish used to be nice. It used to be easygoing. The pastor, you could trust him. You knew where he was going. But now there's always these changes. They want to move things around. They want to change the order of the Mass and so on. And I really have trouble getting used to that. In the past, things went smoothly and neatly. There is sort of a subtle way, perhaps, in which we can have this nostalgia over the past. And it's a little hard for me to explain, but it goes something like this, that very often we end up doing things so that we can say that we completed them. So we can say we did them, sort of just to get it out of the way. It's like going to a foreign country and visiting a museum and rushing through it quickly so that one can tell one's friends that, well, I saw the museum, I went there. The point isn't to enjoy, but to be able to say, I did it, that I've already accomplished it. I think we can live our life that way. I mean, some people even play golf that way. They don't enjoy the 18 holes of golf. It's all to get that into the past, out of the way, so that the 19th hole can be enjoyed. So we can talk about it and have a drink about it and so on. And not really being able to enjoy the real fun of the game as it is going on. So some people read books like that, not because they like it or enjoy it or get into it, but so they can tell their friends, yeah, I read this book. Or same way with going to movies and so on. So it's sort of a subtle version of this distortion of the way we view the past. The past is something to have accomplished so that we can brag about it or talk about it or add it to our list of experiences in some way. And again, it creates a half-hearted atmosphere. The attitude is poor. The person going through the museum isn't really enjoying the paintings and not really getting into them because the whole purpose of it is simply to get it into the past, to have completed it, and to be able to tell others about it. Still, another problem with the past might be the sense of uprootedness that many of us have. In this case, it would be that we would have no sense of the debt that we owe to people who have gone before us. We might see this in relationship to parents. So I talk to a lot of young people whose parents have sacrificed so much. They send them to college, and they end up having no appreciation of that. All they can think of is the way their parents yell at them or that they're old-fashioned in some way. And they don't really get around to being grateful for what their parents have actually done for them. This would be part of it too, would be this no historical sense, no ability to learn what went before us, no sense of wanting to study history or know how a question is developed throughout history, not realizing we stand on the shoulders of other people. It's a sense that we always begin in a vacuum where we start over, that the past is simply of no account to us. We don't care about it, not interested in what went on before. A lot of young people are like that with the experience of the elders. They don't care what the elders went through. They think their world is so different that they don't really want to talk to the elders and find out what it was all about. So this is what I would call the uprooted person. No sense of belonging to a tradition, no sense of history. And again, what does that cause? Half-hearted living. Inability to live fully in the moment because one is not able to mine the riches of the past that went before us. Now, I would like to look at problems that would be concerned with the future. And here, the obvious problem with the future is anxiety, sort of an inordinate fear of the unknown, an inability to trust the future. Here's a person who's always anticipating that something bad is going to happen. They're going into a new job and they figure, well, I'm bound to blow it. People begin to think, well, I can't handle something. I focus always on the negative. When I think of the future, it's going to be bad somehow. I will not measure up to the standards that are required of me, and so on. So that what happens when people, of course, are anxious in this way is that it becomes harder to perform. It becomes harder to live wholeheartedly in the present moment and to do the job well. We might think of the midlife crisis that there's so much talk about these days as having an excessive anxiety about the future. Very often middle-aged men in our culture begin to wonder about their virility, begin to wonder about their ability to relate to the opposite sex. They begin to facing up to the limitations and saying, geez, I'm never going to be as great as I thought I was going to be. I'm not going to climb any higher in the company. In fact, I'm beginning to lose my ambition. The blahs sort of take over. One doesn't want to go to visit anyone in the hospital, or going to a funeral home would be the last thing in the world one would want to do. The very question of death seeps in here, and one says, my heavens, I'm limited. My heavens, I can't control my life. I am a creature who is going to die. And this creates this whole anxiety about the future, which I think very often is of the very essence of this midlife crisis. So we have here an excessive anxiety because the future is unknown and can't be controlled. On the other hand, it's possible to be naively optimistic about the future. Tomorrow will automatically be better without any real effort. Future can be totally planned and manipulated. I'm going to straighten it. I'm going to make it work exactly like I want it to. I remember talking to a man who was writing his dissertation, and he really was intent on doing this dissertation, and he worked out regularly, did his physical exercise, and once told me that he really thought if he did it right, he could live to be 100, and he really expected that. And the poor man died in his 40s before he ever completed his dissertation. It was extremely sad. But he somehow had this idea that seemed naively optimistic that he could almost make it happen, that he would live this long and fruitful life. So, we have here a lot of problems with the question of time. The question of time is one of living half-heartedly, of having poor attitudes towards the present, the past, and the future, which keep us from mining the riches of the now, keep us from really immersing ourselves. So we would have to try to see here where I fit. Am I the harried person? Am I the bored person? Do I partake too much of the now generation? Am I excessively cynical, naively nostalgic? Am I uprooted from the traditions? Am I excessively anxious? Or am I naive about the future? Maybe all of us could see a little bit of a lot of those in ourselves. But on the other hand, one or the other may well predominate, and it would be very good to get in touch with that and know where my own problems lie. Now, it is important to figure out how we're going to deal with those problems. How are we going to respond to this half-hearted living? Well, I would like to use our passing over technique. We ought to look at the life of someone who has really used time well, who's figured out how to live in the moment. And there's an individual I have in mind, and that is Dag Hammarskjöld, the former Secretary General of the United Nations. I won't say a lot about the history of Hammarskjöld. I'm not sure that it's all that important. He was born in 1905 in Sweden. He got a good education in law and economics. He moved up in the public life of his country. In 1946, he entered the foreign ministry. In 1951, he was the vice chairman of the Swedish delegation to the United Nations. 1952, he became the chairman, and finally in 1953, he was elected Secretary General and re-elected in 1957. And then in 1961, he went to Africa on a peacekeeping mission, trying to arrange a ceasefire, and he died in an air crash on September 18th. Now, the interesting thing about Hammarskjöld is that while he lived this active and busy life, while he made a tremendous contribution to world peace, he was at the same time a reflective individual. As busy as he was, he found time to keep a journal. And no one knew he was doing that, but he did. And it was later published as this remarkable book known as Markings, in which he sort of recorded the highlights of his own spiritual journey in life. And as you read through this book, Markings, you find how often he really adverted to this question of time. And one of the key moments in all of this seems to be something that occurred in his life near the end of 1952 or the beginning of 1953, before he was elected Secretary General. He had this strong religious experience, and you often see this quoted. He wrote in his journal, "I don't know who or what put the question. I don't know when it was put. I don't even remember answering. But at some moment I did answer yes to someone or something, and from that hour I was certain that existence is meaningful, and that therefore my life in self-surrender had a goal. From that moment I have known what it means not to look back and to take no thought for the morrow." Now here is a perfect example of what I was trying to say at the beginning, that a religious attitude towards time is absolutely vital. Through this religious experience, Hammarskjöld was able to say yes to life. He was able to live fully in the moment, and he was able then to get a proper outlook on the past and on the future. He said, "I now know what it means not to look back, not to be excessively guilty, not to worry about what went on before, not to be angry at the past, and to make no thought for the morrow." No thought for the morrow. He was able to control his anxiety. Why? Because he got this religious attitude straight. Because he was able to say yes to life, to the one who called him, the one we would call God. And it seems that because he got this straight, he really was able to write some beautiful things. I just want to quote a few things that Hammarskjöld put into Markings. One place he said, "It is now, in this very moment, that I can and must pray for all that I have received. The past and its load of debt are balanced against the present, and on the future I have no claim." He writes in another place, "The present moment is significant, not as the bridge between past and future, but by reason of its contents, contents which can fill our emptiness and become ours if we are capable of receiving them." So the present moment, the now, is not just a bridge between past and future. It is the thing to be mined. It is the richness that we are to get hold of now. And then he said, "For all that has been, thanks. To all that shall be, yes." Great affirmation again of an ability to deal with past and future. So I think Hammarskjöld could guide our reflections. Hammarskjöld is a living flesh and blood example of how to deal properly with time. By looking at his life and reading his spiritual journey and Markings, we would find a lot of illumination and help. Now, I want to begin to build on that and try to describe the opposite way of living from being half-hearted. And we could simply call this living wholeheartedly. To live wholeheartedly means we live with gusto, that we mine the riches of the present moment, that we're able to enjoy a variety of activities. We can find meaning in our daily life. We've come to terms with the past and have a healthy anticipation of the future. The wholehearted person is with it. I can't help thinking about the Schlitz ad with this, the Schlitz beer ad, which said you only go around once in life. Grab all the gusto that you can. Now, I think that had a beautiful message. Not that the only way you can do that is by drinking Schlitz beer. But I think the call is a beautiful one. The call to live life with some abandon, to get into it, to be spontaneous about it, to get all out of it that we can, to live, as I'm saying here, wholeheartedly. Now, I suppose everyone who would hear that would say, yes, that's fine. That's exactly how I would like to live. You know, that's good. That is a good ideal. I think that would be easy to sell. The real problem is doing it. How do we actually accomplish this wholehearted living? Now, what I want to do now is to try to say in many ways how we would go about that. I'm looking for inspiration now. how we could live as more wholehearted persons. And I'm going to say it in a lot of different ways and see if some of it clicks, to see if there's some of it that really would help us, something we could go back to, a quote we could pick out that we could paste on the bathroom mirror, or an image that we could carry around with us. The first thing is this deep fundamental attitude towards time, where we would think of time as an opportunity, as a resource which we all enjoy equally. Here is a whole different attitude towards time as a resource, a common thing. We've all got the same kind of time. Let me say it this way, that if we really think of time only as something measured by a clock, we're probably going to be off the track. Time is not just hands going around on a face of a clock. It's not just numbered motion, as Aristotle called it and as the scholastics described it. Time has more to do with what happens as human beings interact and as we all interact with our higher power. Instead of thinking of time in mechanical terms, as what goes on a clock, we ought to think of it in personal and humane terms. Time is the opportunity to be with another person. Time is what happens as we interact with our God, as we try to do His will and respond to His call. There's a real big difference between being punctual and being timely. I can't help thinking about a friend of mine who was extremely good in dealing with time, I think. But the thing, he was never on time. If you had an appointment with him at 11:30, he'd never be there at 11:30. He would always be late. But the thing is, when he got there, it was worth it. Because when he was there, he was totally present to me. We were able to talk about deep and important things. One had the feeling that I had his undivided attention during this time. In fact, as time would go on, you knew he'd have another appointment at 12:30, and it'd get to be 12:30 or 12:45, and you'd sort of have to remind him of it, because you knew he was going to be late for the next appointment. But the point was that when he was present, he was wholeheartedly present. He wasn't punctual, but he was, in a sense, timely. He had this humane, personal sense of time. Now, I'm not advocating being late for appointments, because that just usually makes people mad and so on. But I do want to use the example to point out that there is another way of really looking at what time is all about. Let me illustrate that in thinking of parents and dealing with children. Suppose there's a father who says, well, I'm going to give my kid 4 hours this evening. You know, I'm going to give him 4 hours of my time. But during the 4 hours, he's, first of all, watching the news, and the kid wants him to go out and play catch with him. He says, well, later, wait till after the news. Then he goes out and plays catch with him, and he doesn't really spend much time with him. He's talking to the neighbor half the time. Then they come in, and the kid wants to talk to him about something that went on in school, and he flips the television on. He's sort of half listening and half watching the television. The 4 hours go by like that. Poor use of time. But let's take another example. A father says, I only got 1 hour. He's only got 1 hour to be with his son, but while he's with his son, he's present. He's listening to him. He plays catch. He tries to show him how to do it better. Kid wants to tell him about school. He listens. He asks some good questions. He really tries to understand what's going on with all of that. He spends quality time. The hours on the clock meant nothing. So it was 4 hours. That means nothing. In fact, it might have been a waste of time, because the kid might be mad because the father didn't really pay any attention to him at all. And so he's feeling worse than before. But the hour time is a good use of time. That's what we would mean by living wholeheartedly, by thinking of time as a humane thing, of thinking of it as a resource that we all have. We've all got the same amount of time. It's there for us to use. While people are listening to this tape, some people can be distracted. Some people cannot be paying attention. They won't get anything out of it. Other people will get into it and really try to pay attention and thereby mine the riches of what might be available. Now let me try from a whole different perspective to illumine this notion of wholeheartedness. Let me try now to talk about the world's religious traditions and see what illumination we might find there. Now here I would like, first of all, to turn to the Buddhist tradition. And I look at a parable of the Buddha. The Buddha was a great storyteller, just as Jesus. It seems like great religious figures love to use stories to make their point. And so Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, told these wonderful parables. And here's one. It goes something like this. There's a man traveling across a field, and he encountered a tiger. He fled, the tiger after him. Coming to a precipice, he caught hold of the root of a wild vine and swung himself over the edge. The tiger sniffed at him from above. Trembling, the man looked down to where far below another tiger was waiting to eat him. Only the vine sustained him. 2 mice, one white and one black, little by little started to gnaw away the vine. The man at that very moment spotted a luscious strawberry near him. Grasping the vine with one hand, he plucked the strawberry with the other. He placed it in his mouth. He savored the strawberry, and he said, "How sweet it tastes." It's the end of the Buddhist parable. The meaning of the parable is this business of living wholeheartedly in the moment. Instead of being angry about the fact that the tiger had chased him, instead of being terribly anxious about the fact that he was going to die in a few minutes, he was able to do the one thing that was available to him, to enjoy the moment, to live the moment. He savored the strawberry. So if there was ever a man who was able to overcome obstacles and enjoy the moment and live wholeheartedly in it, it was this man hanging by the vine. I've noticed when I've told people that story in the past, some of them latch onto it and they will use the phrase, well, enjoy the strawberry. Or I remember in an office of people that I told that story to, they started passing strawberries one to the other when they were feeling harried in their work. And so it's a matter of seeing if one can find a little bit of inspiration in that particular religious tradition. Let me turn now to the Jewish tradition. The Jewish people made, of course, one of the most important religious discoveries in all of history, and that was that time was not cyclical, that all the important things didn't happen in the past, in the days of the gods, but that the new and important things were happening in history, that God was to be met in their experience, that God was one who did new and surprising things, that history was moving in a direction towards a final goal, that experience was full and rich because it was right there that God was met. The Jewish people seem to have retained that fundamental religious insight over the years. It's one of the reasons it seems they're able to make holy so many ordinary things, while they can have religious celebrations in their home, while they have such a strong sense of family life. When I think about that, I think about the play and the movie The Fiddler on the Roof. The fiddler has that notion. Tevye is able to talk to God about everything, about his financial situation and why he couldn't be a rich man, about the problems with his daughter and his family life. He can talk to God about all those things because he finds God in the moment, in history, in his own experience. And that insight from the Jewish tradition is absolutely vital for us. It's something that we all need to latch on to. The present moment is important because we meet God there. We're not allowed to just throw it away. It's a vital resource because God has put His grace and blessings in it. It is our great opportunity to respond to the call of God. And so the Jewish tradition helps us to live wholeheartedly in the now because it is absolutely filled with meaning, a meaning put there by Almighty God, Yahweh Himself. Now let's just look at the Christian world for a minute here and the teachings of Jesus. Jesus talked a lot about the kairos. In Greek, that means the moment of decision. Jesus, I often have the picture of a man who was moving rapidly and who said, now's the time. Leave the dead, bury the dead. No, leave the father and the mother. Come follow me now. There's not much time. The kingdom is here. And it has that strong call nature to it. Many of the theologians of our own time have picked that up, that Christianity is should be thought of in terms of call and response. And if we're ever going to respond, it's now. The call won't come later on. And the call just isn't in the past. It's in precisely in this moment. In fact, God is calling me in every moment to mine the riches of that time, to do the best I can with it, to develop my character and personality, all now. There's a sort of urgency about the teachings of Jesus. There's another side to Jesus' teaching when he's sensitive and calmer and giving people time to work things out, and that's part of the Christian idea. And I know the great teaching of Bernard Herring and others that God calls us only to take one step forward and we should be calm about it. That's the counterpoint, but there's also the other side of the gospel, the kairos, the moment of decision is now and let's not blow it. So we find that Christianity, I think, has something to say to us as well in this matter of living wholeheartedly. So I go on now, I think about some of my own experience. I find myself in my own life having a lot of trouble with time, of feeling harried, of feeling frenzied, and getting nervous because I'm late for something or having too much to do. I remember one time in my life when I was extremely busy as in my campus ministry work, I got the flu. And when I got the flu, I was thought I was dying, as I usually do when I have a minor illness. And I couldn't function, and I opened up my little book where I keep all my appointment listings. I said, my heavens, I've got this to do. I've got these people to see. I've got this lecture to give. I've got a class to prepare. I've got all these calls and demands upon my time, and I'm in this frenzied kind of state, laying there. And as I'm laying there, in a flash, a line came to me from one of John Donne, the theologian, one of his book, I think The Way of All the Earth. And I don't think I remembered it correctly, but it came to me something like this. There's enough time. There's always exactly the right amount of time. There's not too much, and there's not too little. There's always the right amount of time. And in a flash, in one of the great insight moments of my own life, I saw that that was true. That the problem of life isn't that we've got so much to do. There's not a blackboard somewhere up in the sky saying that I had to give so many lectures or write so many articles or see so many people. The real problem of life is to use the time we have. We've got exactly the right amount of time, not too much and not too little. Because the only trick in life is to use the time that we now have constructively and as well as we can do it, to put forth a proper effort. This is a common resource. We all have this time given to us. We can't hoard it, and we shouldn't waste it. It's just there to be used, and for us to put forth the proper effort. In a flash, while I was laying there, I saw it. It was true, and my frenzy and anxiety left me for once, and I was peaceful and calm, and I said to myself, all I've got to do right now is lay here and be sick. Just lay here and be sick. I don't have to do anything else. This is what I am called to do now. And it was a very freeing feeling. And I've always tried to resurrect that feeling. I've always tried to get back to it so I could feel it strongly and so I could live it out. And now and then I will be able to do it. Sometimes my students tell me when I'm frenzied near the end of a class, they'll say, Father, cool it. There's enough time. There's always exactly the right amount of time. There's not too much and there's not too little. And I get that little speech from them and I'm able to calm down a little bit. It could perhaps be a point of inspiration for us. Now, another thing that we're going to have to do to live as this wholehearted person is to cultivate a healthy memory. To be able to, for example, forgive ourselves for the sins and failures in the past. We have to be able to feel God's mercy. That's why the gospel is good news. It's the good news because we're never imprisoned in our past. God always gives us a chance to start over. So if God forgives us, we ought to be able to forgive ourselves and not be so upset about it. We've got to learn to integrate our past. To get over our angers. I mean, it doesn't make any sense for people to be mad about what Sister Elizabeth did or said back in the second grade. And so many people I talk to, upset about the previous training. To be angry at Sister Elizabeth for one's whole life makes very little sense. We need to integrate that past so that we can live in a healthier fashion in the present moment. We've got to learn to profit from our experiences in the past, to recall our roots, to live out of the tradition, to be able to accept both the good and the bad. And of course, we must achieve a proper anticipation in life. To have a proper anticipation means I get over the excessive anxiety, in which I do learn to plan rationally and carefully for the future, but I recognize that the future is essentially unknowable and that I cannot totally manipulate it or control it. This means I have to be able to face death in a spirit of hope and find a way to combine in my life all my active efforts to improve along with a healthy effort to surrender to God. I have to learn to live with a proper anticipation. My anxieties could be gotten rid of to large measure if I was able to say to God, I hand myself over to you. I surrender myself to you, God. And so we're trying to achieve this proper anticipation. All of that is so we can live more wholeheartedly, so we can mine the riches of the moment, and so we can get over all of our half-hearted approaches to life. Then we're going to be much more in tune with who we're supposed to be. Then we're responding to the call of God. Then we are able to handle time as a true religious believer. Now we've got a healthy attitude towards it, and we'll hopefully find some inspiration to live as this wholehearted and dedicated person.
All rights to this talk are reserved by St. Anthony Messenger Press, 1615 Republic Street, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45210.